et bienvenue à une conférence de presse avec le chef du nouveau Parti démocratique du Canada, Jagmeet Singh, et la candidate du NPD pour la région de Toronto-Danforth, Clare Hacksel. Nous allons entendre des remarques de Clare et Jagmeet avant de prendre des questions en personne. Ensuite, nous irons aux questions posées par Zoom.
Good to see you. Good morning. Good morning. Good. Yeah.
So I will go ahead and pass the mic to Clare.
Hello, thank you all so much for being here today. It's such a joy to be here with leader of the federal NDP, Jagmeet Singh, and my good friend, TDSB School Board Trustee, Sarah Earhart. We're here because families are really struggling. This is the only country, Canada is the only G7 country that doesn't have a national school food program. And we know that as parents, it's so important that we send our kids to school every day full so they can focus on learning and playing and doing all the things that kids need to do. And we know that people like Sarah and organizations across Toronto have been working hard to make sure that there are food programs for kids. But those organizations, despite filling the gaps, should not be having to do this on their own. They need support from all levels of government. And that's why we're here. We're here to call on the Liberals and say that they need to come to the table with a school food program that they've been promising. This is long overdue. So without holding on any longer, I'm going to introduce my friend Jagmeet to speak about how the NDP is fighting for families.
Thanks so much, Claire.
You're welcome.
That's awesome. Thanks so much. I am really honored to be here, and I'll be passing the mic over to Sarah at the end. And Sarah, thanks so much for being here as well. As you heard from Claire, is why we want Claire to be our next member of parliament for Davenport, or for Danforth. She is so passionate, cares so much about people, and you can hear in the way she's advocating, she really wants to make sure families get a break. And that's what we're here to fight about. We want to make sure that families who are really hurting with the cost of groceries have some relief. We know how hard it is for families that go into the grocery store and are saying, how are we possibly supposed to afford food for our families, pay the bills, pay our rent or mortgage? It is so difficult. And so what we've been saying is we've got to find ways to give people some relief, give people a break. And the Liberals promised a national food program in 2019. And it has been years and years and nothing. They've continued to break their promise. We're not surprised by that. They have done that in the past. They promised to bring in pharmacare for 30 years and broke those promises for 30 years until we finally forced them to do so. So we want to make it very clear. We are demanding the federal government bring in the supports necessary for a national food program in schools. This is going to help out so many families. I think about the guilt that parents feel right now when they are just barely able to keep their head above water, don't have enough to make sure their kids have a very nutritious, good meal, and are just scraping together some snacks for them to go to school and have something to eat. And I know what that's like when you're wondering, am I doing enough for my kids? Am I doing enough as a parent? I remember when I had to take care of my kid brother when I was 20 and he was 15, and making sure I put food on the table for him. It was a struggle. Parents are feeling that right now. So the least we can do is take a little bit off their plates to have parents know that their kids can go to school and they will be guaranteed a nutritional meal. That is something that would be very meaningful for those kids. Like Claire mentioned, it'll ensure that they can focus on going to school and doing what they need to do in school. For the parents, it takes off that pressure, that guilt and that worry that their kids aren't getting the best meal possible packed for them to go to school. And it's going to save families money. It's going to make sure that those families are actually going to have a bit of a break. In contrast to that, while we know that families right now, we're seeing record food bank usage, highest since 1989, we're seeing millions of kids now in poverty because of the cost of living being so high. And what is the response of the Liberals? Again, they've ignored this problem. They've promised and then broken the promise of bringing in a national food program. And then we see the Conservatives who claim to care about people struggling with the cost of food, but have voted against a national school food program, not once, but twice very recently. So on one hand, they talk about the struggles that people are going through, then they vote against a concrete solution that would actually help out parents and kids. It shows you Pierre Poilievre is not in it for you. Pierre Poilievre personally voted against bringing in a national school program. So he is not in it for you. That's why I want to make our demand very clear. We've got a budget coming up. We've been making this demand now for months. We want to see in this upcoming budget funding to support a national food program for kids in school. This is our demand, and we want to be very clear. We expect this to happen. We're going to keep the pressure going. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to do that again in French and then ask Sarah to share some words about the work that she's been doing here on the ground in Danforth, in addition to Claire's great advocacy as a local school board trustee. I want to hear from Sarah Earhart as well. Donc, c'est clair qu'on est dans une crise d'abordabilité. C'est impossible de rejoindre les deux bouts. C'est particulièrement difficile à faire des épiceries, particulièrement pour des familles. Si vous avez des enfants, c'est vraiment difficile. Et dans ce temps, on sait que le grand problème, c'est le fait qu'il y a de l'avarice ou la cupidité et l'exploitation des grandes entreprises et que les libéraux n'ont pas agi pour régler ça. Donc, ce qu'on demande, c'est pour donner un coup de main aux familles, donner un coup de main qui va aider les familles. On demande un programme national pour investir davantage pour la nourriture dans l'école. Ça va aider les familles, ça va réduire les coûts pour les familles, ça va aider les enfants aussi. On sait que les conservateurs, et particulièrement Pierre Poilievre, lui-même, a voté contre cette idée. Il a voté contre les enfants, contre les parents. Il a voté contre de l'aide pour enlever un peu de pression sur les épaules des parents et des familles. Il a voté contre vous parce qu'il n'est pas là pour régler les problèmes. Il n'est pas là pour vous. Il ne se bat pas pour vous. Donc, on continue de demander ça, on met la pression sur les libéraux. Les libéraux ont promis de mettre en œuvre un tel programme depuis 2019, mais ils n'ont pas agi. Et on sait ça, on sait que les libéraux souvent font des compromis, mais ils n'agissent pas. Donc aujourd'hui, on demande que dans la prochaine budget, le gouvernement libéral mette de l'avant, mettre d'argent d'enfants. Merci. Thank you so much. Before we get to questions, I'm just going to invite Sarah Earhart, local school board trustee, to talk about her work. She's been an advocate and fighting for this idea, and most recently actually put forward the idea of having a school food program in front of the board recently. So maybe you could share a little bit about that, Sarah.
Thank you so much. Good day, and just thank you so much to you both for speaking out on this issue. It's so important. As a public school trustee, we actually were just talking about school nutrition programs before going into the long weekend. We received a report that shared that in every part of the city of Toronto, there are families experiencing food insecurity. And in some parts of the city, the numbers are over 60% of school families are experiencing food insecurity. It is shocking right now. And so it is so important that we're speaking about this. We do have some school nutrition programs in the Toronto District School Board. These are largely, and this is what was shocking to me, these are largely funded through charitable contributions. Less than 25% of the funding comes from governments to purchase the food for the scarce programs that we have, because they're not in every school. They're not in all of the schools where these needs exist. Less than 25% comes from governments. And where is the federal government for City of Toronto and school food programs in Toronto? They're not there. The funding is coming from the province and from the city and from charitable contributions from Toronto families, but the federal government is not a partner. And so it is just so important that we're speaking about this at this time. I'm so grateful to Jagmeet and to the children. When more than 60% of families are food insecure, it means children are going to school hungry. And we need the federal government to come to the table with other orders of government. And I'm just so hopeful that this will happen, and so grateful to the NDP for speaking and advocating on this issue. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A little French in there too. Well, again, a huge thank you to our school board trustee here locally, Sarah, and a big thank you to Clare. Clare Hacksel is just an incredible candidate for us here in Danforth, and we're really looking forward to you becoming the next member of parliament. With that, I'm ready for any questions that you might have on site. Donc, je suis prêt pour vos questions.
Okay, we're going to start with questions on site. We'll do one question, one follow-up. We're starting with City TV.
Today's April 1st. The new carbon tax comes into play. What's the NDP's opinion on that?
Well, we know that right now families are really feeling the squeeze of the cost of living crisis, and that's something that's very much on our mind. But let's be very clear. We know that Pierre Poilievre would have you believe that this is the major concern when it comes to the cost of living. But we know when Canadians were asked what is a major driver of the cost of food going up, and they were asked that question because it's one of the things that really hits hard, and it's what we're talking about today. They said it's corporate greed, and they're right. We have done extensive research into this. We've had the Parliamentary Budget Office look into this, and it is clear that large corporate grocery store CEOs have used inflation as cover to jack up the price of your food. So while people are hurting right now, having a hard time trying to buy the groceries that they need, Galen Weston is making more money than he's ever made in the history of his company. They're making record profits as CEOs, and they're bringing in record bonuses as CEOs and making record profits for the company. That's the problem. You're never going to hear Pierre Poilievre talk about that. He's never going to talk about corporate greed or Galen Weston ripping you off because his chief strategist, one of the major strategists for his party, is a major lobbyist for the largest corporate grocery food chain in this country. It is no wonder that he's not going to take this on. The Liberals have ignored this problem, but we've taken it on. So we know that people are worried about the cost of living. And for those families, we say to you, we see you, we hear you. That's why we're fighting for a national food program in schools to give you some relief. That's why we fought for dental care, to make sure that families were able to save some money, get their kids the care they need, seniors are able to get the care they need, and also save them money. That's why we fought for pharmacare. That's going to save thousands of dollars for families that are with people living with diabetes and people with who need those devices and medication. We're saving money for families, and with free birth control, that's going to save lots of money again for families, for women that need access, for people that need access. That's going to save them money. We've been fighting to save money for people, while the Conservatives want to let the corporate CEOs that are ripping you off have a free ride. We're fighting back. And today we're talking about another real concrete relief that's going to save a lot of money for families and make sure their kids get the nutrition they need.
Follow up. Why is it important for children to have lunch?
Well, I mean, I think it would be obvious if you've had a kid and they're hungry, there's nothing else that they can focus on. If you're hungry, I put aside being a kid. As an adult, if you're hungry, it's hard to focus on anything else. And so we know, and as Sarah pointed out, there are so many families that are just struggling with food security. That means kids are going hungry. And when kids are hungry, they can't focus on school. They can't focus on having fun. They can't focus on being a kid. And it should not happen. And as Sarah pointed out, the fact that there is no contribution to any of these school programs from the federal government is wrong. We've got people making charitable donations, and that's incredible that they're being so generous, but that is not a way to feed people in a sustainable manner. We need a safe, stable funding from the federal government to ensure that every kid going to school in our country, no matter where they live, no matter what school they go to, is getting a nutritious meal. It's going to help out those families who are feeling the guilt of not being able to make sure their kids get the meals that they need. It's going to help those kids focus on school. And it's important to point out, like Claire mentioned, that we are the only G7 nation in the world that doesn't have a national food program in schools. So take that in. We're talking Germany, France, Italy, the United Kingdom, everywhere else. Even the United States has in place a national food program in schools, but Canada doesn't. Let's fix that wrong. The Liberals have been promising this for years now. They've not delivered on it. Let's force them to do it in this upcoming budget.
Okay, I think with that, we're going to go to questions on Zoom.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. So just a reminder to folks on Zoom to please use the raise hand function to ask a question and one follow-up. Juste un petit rappel à tout le monde qui est sur Zoom d'utiliser la fonction lever la main pour poser une question et une question de suivi. We will go ahead and start with Mackenzie from Global. Please go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Singh. You have many conversations with the Liberals consistently. Have they indicated to you that this will be in the upcoming budget?
Thanks so much for the question, Mackenzie. We saw the Liberals promise this in the last budget in 2019. They campaigned on it again in 2021, but we do not see any funding for it. So I'm very worried that the Liberals are just going to talk about this. So we want to make sure they deliver it. We want to see funding. We want to see dollars committed to. We don't want to just see a vague promise, but we want to see money in the upcoming budget. So to your question, the Liberals have promised this in previous budgets, but we don't have one in place. Sarah can tell you there's no funding yet at the federal level coming to schools here in Toronto. So we want to see this happen. We think this is a major priority, and we are going to continue to put pressure on this government to deliver that in a concrete way in this upcoming budget.
On another topic, we've seen Conservative MPs encourage constituents and they themselves go outside of constituency office for a number of your MPs, Charlie Angus being one of them. Do you think it's appropriate to see Conservative MPs encouraging protests outside constituency office?
Well, I mean, let's talk about what the Conservatives are doing. So in a time when we're in a minority government, in a time when people are struggling with the cost of groceries, the cost of rent, the cost of living, at a time when they're struggling, the Conservatives are telling their supporters to go and protest other members of Parliament. But they are not saying a single thing about Galen Weston and other corporate CEOs like him who are ripping off Canadians, making record profits while people can't afford their groceries. It shows you what Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives are all about. They're not about going after the real problem. For them, it's all about power. They're saying go after MPs because they want power. They're not saying go after the corporate CEOs that are ripping you off. They're not talking about going after TELUS, Rogers, and Bell, who are ripping you off when it comes to your cell phone, or the corporate landlords that are scooping up housing, making it harder for people to afford to buy a home, or the corporate CEOs that are ripping you off when you go to grocery stores. Let's look at what the Conservatives are prioritizing. They're not going after the real problem. We're focused on making sure people have an affordable life. Let's go after the real problems. And we're using our power in a minority government to deliver results. We're getting people dental care. We're getting people pharma care. We're making the childcare legislation permanent so that people can actually afford childcare for their families. We're actually delivering concrete things for people when the Conservatives are not even focused on the real problem.
We will now go to Mary Brooke with Island Social Trends. Please go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Singh.
Hi there.
Hi. So you've said today that you expect this to happen, as in the National Food Program being in the next budget. So do you have sort of an inside track on this being, is this within the confines of your supply and confidence agreement? Are you demanding this? Would this be a deal breaker? And has the program been costed?
Thanks for the question. Well, I want to be very, very clear. We're demanding this, and often, as we have in the past, we demand things because we want the government to act. We don't want just some words or a vague promise. We want to see a real commitment. So it's our demand today that the Liberal government bring in place funding for a national food program for kids in schools. That's our demand. Our expectation is that it's not just words. We want to see real commitments in the sense of dollars so that kids can get a nutritious meal in school. That's our demand. That's what we're asking for. The Liberals, again, have promised this since 2019. Specifically, they made a promise to bring it in the budget in 2019. They didn't do it. They promised again in 2021 in their election campaign to bring it in. Haven't done it. So now we're making it very clear we are demanding the government do this. It's not specifically part of one of the things that we've negotiated, but we are demanding that the government move forward with this. We've been asking for this for months now. We're going to continue to put pressure on them. I should also mention that Pierre Poilievre voted against this idea twice. He voted against kids getting a nutritious meal while people are struggling to buy food at a record time of food bank usage. He's even mentioned that. He knows that it's a record time of food bank usage. And despite knowing that, he voted against you and your family getting a nutritious meal at school for your kids. That's who Pierre Poilievre is.
And also, the federal government, you say, is not a partner to this program right now, but as federal and municipal and charitable organizations are. So what is your pitch point to the federal government? Why should they come on to something that's already being, maybe not perfectly, but delivered as much as possible through the provincial and school board level?
Well, we know that the programs that are in place in provinces across the country aren't covering everybody. Because they're limited funds, they're covering some schools or some age or some demographics, but it's not a program that's in place for every kid. And when we look at the needs are just not being met. Even in Toronto, when there are some programs, as Sarah pointed out, there are still massive gaps. There are still a significant number of kids that aren't getting a nutritious meal in school. And if we take that across the country, in BC, back in the province I represent now, there's a great initiative where the BC NDP brought in place some funding for school food program. But that program also doesn't cover everybody. It covers only a percentage of kids. We want to see whatever exists across the country expanded to cover every single kid going to school. Everyone should get a nutritious meal. And so let's stop with the piecemeal approach and have real federal partnership so that every kid can get a meal.
We will now go to Marina with CBC News. Please go ahead.
Hi there. Thanks
Hi there.
for taking our questions. So
course.
if the federal government were to put a food program, a national school food program into this upcoming budget, what specifically do you want to see or not see in a potential program?
Well, I want to see a program that is sufficient to cover all kids in all schools in all provinces across this country. I want to see real dollars, not just a vague promise that this is something that they will do or they will look into. I want to see a commitment with dollars so that this program can be funded and kids can actually get a nutritious meal. I want to see that done immediately, and I don't want to see something that is a promise in the distant future, but I want to see something that's starting to roll out immediately.
We see the federal government rolling out a dental care program, a pharmacare program. Those are very expensive. We're talking about billions and billions and billions of dollars. A national school program would also cost more money. So how do you make the case that this is something that the government can afford? I think we can get behind the idea that kids should be able to have full bellies and clean teeth, but how is this something that is something that can be paid for?
Well, I think there's a lot of ways for us to be responsible at the federal level, and I think the Liberals haven't shown that. First of all, they've been spending hundreds of millions of dollars on outsourcing services that could be done by the civil service instead. And this hundreds of millions of dollars on outsourced, on contracted out work is wrong. To consultants, that's wrong. And we've seen some of the examples of how wasteful that is. We also know that there's billions of dollars going towards fossil fuel subsidies that continue. That is a waste. We should not be spending billions of public money on highly profitable companies. The oil and gas sector is also making record profits when we talk about corporations that are exploiting people. That's another sector where they're making record profits and they're not contributing their fair share, and they should not be getting public money. There are a number of areas that we've called for, in addition to putting in place a wealth tax on excess profits, like other countries, including the United Kingdom, have done, where they see record profits being made in certain sectors. They put in place a wealth tax. I remind folks that's a conservative government in the UK that put in place a wealth tax. We think that there's ways to do that as well. There's ways to increase revenue in a responsible way. There's ways to ensure that we are not wasting money. And if we think about our priorities, what could be a more important priority if we stop wasting money in other areas than investing in our kids to make sure they have a meal? And I'll close with the fact that every other country in the world that's a G7 nation has figured out a way to ensure that kids can get a meal at school. We should be able to do that here in Canada. I reject the conservative approach. We talk about food security as an issue and then vote against the school lunch program or school food program. And I reject the Liberals' approach of just promising this and never delivering it. That's why New Democrats are demanding it today.
We will now go to Randy Toms with 93.1 The Border. Please go ahead.
Hi.
Hi there.
Jagmeet, can you explain a little bit more around the details of the program? You talked about providing money, but how would that money be used? Would it be used for schools to renovate, maybe put kitchens in? Are we talking staff? Are we talking food? Are we talking a whole bundle here?
Well, the delivery is something that's going to require working with provinces as schools are a provincial jurisdiction. But we know there's a number of existing programs, and those programs, many of them just need additional funding and they could deliver more food to more kids. So I think about the current program that exists in some schools in Toronto. If we were able to fund it properly, we could expand that. I know in BC, similarly, there is a program in place. The funding there is enough to cover a percentage of the kids. I believe it's about 20% of kids, but that leaves 80% of kids not supported. So lot of it is ensuring that there's adequate funding, and that funding can expand existing programs. They can then expand the delivery of the food that they are already providing. I would say a couple of stipulations. I would want to see that this program is focused on public delivery of a food program, or a not-for-profit delivery of a food program. And the actual way it's done, we could figure that out. But let's have the federal government step up and commit to delivering the funding necessary so that every kid in our school, in our country, going to school gets a meal.
I had a question earlier about the carbon tax, and then you diverted directly back to this program. Is it kind of the feeling now that it's April 1st, this tax is in, we're, I guess, move on to something else?
Well, what I would say is the reason why this has become a topic of concern is because of the cost of living. And I hear people when they talk about the cost of living. I think it's very important for us to focus on that. But when we talk about the cost of living, and we're talking about grocery prices as one of the major things that people are concerned about, Pierre Poilievre would have you believe that it's something to do with the carbon tax that your food prices are up. When the evidence is in, it is corporate greed. The CEOs of, basically there's 3 CEOs that run the vast majority of grocery stores in our country, are making record profits. If they're making record profits, it's clear that it's not a matter of just increased costs. They are exploiting and gouging people. And we know this is not something that is unheard of. In Canada in 2018, the large corporate grocery stores and bread producers colluded to jack up the price of bread. So that happens in our country. So I'm just saying that the concern around an increased tax is that, well, it's going to make it even harder for people to afford their food. I'm pointing out what Canadians already know. The real cause of the cost of food going up is corporate greed. And you're never going to hear Pierre Poilievre talk about that, because those are his buddies. His chief strategist for the Conservative Party is a major corporate lobbyist for the largest corporate grocery store. They're not going to go after the real problem. They want to distract you from what the real problem is. I'm focused on the real problem. On top of that, I also will say the Canadians know that there's a serious impact in cost of the climate crisis that we're living in. I've been to communities that have been evacuated because of extreme fires and then extreme flooding in the same year. So we know we've got to take on the climate crisis and do that in a responsible way, that we take on the big polluters. And so our plan is, let's make life more affordable, let's take on corporate greed, and let's be sure we're protecting our planet.
We have time for one last question, and it'll come from Stuart Benson with the Hill Times. Please go ahead.
Hi, good morning. I'm noticing that there's an announcement scheduled with Prime Minister, Deputy of Finance, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Minister of Youth and Women and Girls. So there's been a couple of pre-budget announcements from the Liberals on a number of things. So I know you're saying you're demanding this and you're expecting it should be there. And you've said you don't have any sort of inside knowledge about whether or not they will be making this announcement. But CTV has reported there could be as many as 17 more announcements between now and the budget. Are you concerned that even if they do announce this, like they've done with pharmacare and contraceptives, that they're going to sort of leave your party out of the spotlight on this, and your party may not get the credit, as it were, that you may deserve?
Well, I appreciate the question. You know, we've shown again and again that we're in it for people. And so we're fighting to make sure life is better for people. Whether we get the credit or not doesn't change the fact that people are better off. That to us is the victory. If people are better off, then we have done our job. And so whether it's pharmacare, we fought for that. It's clear that the Liberals would never have done it. They promised and broke that promise for decades. Only now, when we've got the leverage in a minority government, we negotiate and force them to move forward on it. So we're going to keep on fighting for people, whether we get the credit or not. That's not our goal or our priority. Our priority is getting people relief right now. While the Conservatives, their goal is just power. They're not interested in using the power they have right now to help people out. They've not done that. They're more interested in setting themselves up to win political battles. We're interested in getting people relief right now. That's our commitment. That's our focus. On this food program, we're demanding it. We've been demanding it for months. We're going to keep on demanding that it happen. And we want to make sure that it's not just an announcement, that it actually gets delivered. So we're going to focus on that. With the pharmacare, we've got the Liberals to commit. Now we want to see it rolled out. We want to see negotiations with provinces. We want to see people getting free diabetes medication and medical devices, as well as contraceptives. So we're going to keep on fighting. That's what we do as New Democrats. We fight for you. We fight to make life better for people. And that's our goal. That's our priority. That's everything we've done shows you again and again, we use our power for people.
And just if I could do a quick follow-up on just the specifics. So assuming that this money appears in the next budget, the 200 million in the first year, $1 billion over the next 5 years, how would you like to see that money distributed between the provinces and territories? I've heard people say that it should be a matching program, like dollar for dollar, compared to what provinces and territories are already spending, or do you think it should be based on per student? What are your thoughts on that?
In terms of delivery, I want to see the best program that delivers the most care to the most kids. That's really that's our principle. That's the way we look at programs. How do we get the most care to the people, the kids that need it? Let's get the care to the kids that need it. Let's make sure that they get, whether it's in any of the programs we fight for, we want to make sure that delivery matches the needs for kids, for people, for whoever we're trying to help out. And that's our priority. But let's be really clear. Our focus now is making sure the federal government steps up. We can work out delivery. We can work out what the best way to get that money out to communities, to families, to provinces, so it makes it to schools. We can work that out. But let's get a commitment. The upcoming budget. That's our focus right now. So we are going to keep the pressure going. We demand the government do this. Food bank usage, when child poverty is on the rise, when people are hurting when it comes to the cost of food, and parents are feeling that guilt that they don't know if they can afford to put together a nutritious meal, so they scrap together some snacks. We want to make sure that parents don't have to worry about this. We want to make sure kids get a good meal, and we are fighting to make sure that happens.
So I see no more questions. Je ne vois plus de questions. This concludes our press conference. Ceci conclut notre conférence de presse. Merci. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Merci. All right.